Whether you're asking some guy on the street, or an NBA player in an interview, or a troll on the internet, one thing that a lot of people will agree on is that Michael Jordan was the greatest NBA player of all time. However, in this video, I'm going to expose the truth that Michael Jordan is nowhere near the best NBA player to ever live, and in fact, he was relatively average and forgettable if you're just looking at how he actually performed on the court. In the early 1980s, Michael Jordan established himself as the dominant college player of his era. Now, he is not the greatest college player of all time. That honor goes to Pistol Pete Maravich, but Michael Jordan was certainly the best person in college at that time. Now, when he eventually graduated in 1984, he decided to do something a little different than what most other great college basketball players do. Most of Jordan's teammates and former rivals went into the NBA and tried to make a living as professional basketball players. However, Michael Jordan had more of a business mind, so what he did is he marketed his skills as a basketball player to people who were trying to learn how to play basketball. He held basketball camps, and he especially focused on training children whose wealthy parents were willing to pay top dollar to have one of the top collegiate athletes of all time train their sons in the art of basketball. So, in other words, Michael Jordan was the Bob Ross of basketball, except he was much more expensive and not on cable. But nonetheless, his fame spread, and despite the fact that he hadn't spent a single minute in an NBA uniform, he was still the best known player in the country. He even got a role in the movie Space Jam without ever having been a professional basketball player. Now, a lot of people speculated over the years as to how good he would have been if he had actually played in the NBA, and Michael Jordan himself, when he reached about the age of 38, thought to himself that it was either now or never. At this point, he actually figured that he had something to prove because he had a lot of doubters, and he thought that by entering the league, he'd be able to disprove their claims about his game. Jordan was hoping to play on a championship caliber team and win an NBA title. However, not shockingly, most teams were skeptical of the prospect of having a 38-year-old rookie on their squad in a league where most players are retired by about the age of 35 at the oldest. So Michael Jordan actually had to buy a partial ownership stake in the Washington Wizards, and as part of a negotiation with the other owners, he sold them his share in exchange for a slot on the team, which was a pretty good strategy, although the problem with the Washington Wizards, as we'll see, is that the team sucked ass. Stunningly, Michael Jordan was actually able to manage 25 points a game with 5 rebounds and 5 assists during the first half of the 2001-2002 season, a stat line which is identical to that of Kobe Bryant, the other man pictured in this photo, and a guy who had actually modeled his game after the teachings of Michael Jordan. So it turned out that Bob Ross could hold his own against Picasso, at least for a short period of time. Much of the excitement over Jordan's style of play came from media exaggeration. Now, it is true he did have a few spectacular plays where he would display a level of athleticism which seemed impossible for a 38-year-old. But for the most part, what we saw with Michael Jordan was a style of play very similar to that of Paul Pierce. Someone who's very slow and plodding and relies more on tactical acumen than, say, athleticism or sheer skill. So Jordan was playing well, but it wasn't anything we haven't seen before and that we haven't seen done better by other players. The best measure of an athlete's true greatness is whether or not that athlete can help his team win championships. And in the case of Michael Jordan, he couldn't even get his team into the playoffs. He was in a watered-down Eastern Conference, and still, he was not able to lift his team to even compete in the playoffs. So that seems like a very strong piece of evidence that he may be just a little bit overrated. Looking at the numbers, we can see that Michael Jordan was injured, hence he only played 60 games as opposed to the full 82. This probably did impede his play to some degree. However, since he's supposedly a skill-based player rather than a sheer athlete, this should not have affected his stats as severely as it did. His scoring average dropped from over 25 to just under 23. His assist numbers were only a little bit over 5, which is good for a shooting guard, but not all-time good. Dwayne Wade averaged over 5 for his entire career, and Dwayne Wade is not the best shooting guard of all time. Rebound-wise, he was able to average about 5.7, which again is good, but not all-time great. Kobe has averaged more than 5.7 before, even in years he wasn't given the MVP award. So, I'm honestly not that impressed. Over the summer, Jordan's knees healed, and he returned to full health for the 2002-2003 season. He would be ages 39 and 40 respectively during the course of that season, and his health is proven by the fact that he managed to play in all 82 games. So you might be thinking, sure, he's a little tiny bit older, but he's no longer a rookie, so he has actual on-court experience now, and he is healthy. So surely he will not only lead his team to victory, but do so with numbers befitting of an all-time great player. Someone who eclipses Wilt Chamberlain and Bernard King and Scottie Pippen and all the rest. Well, let's see what happened. It turns out that even with a fully healthy Michael Jordan who has actual on-court experience, the Washington Wizards ended with the same exact record and again failed to make the playoffs. Just like Michael Jordan in this picture, I find myself wondering, well, what the fuck happened? The answer is quite simple. Michael Jordan failed to live up to expectations. He turned into the equivalent of a draft bust. His numbers declined his sophomore season. Michael Jordan only averaged 20 points a game, 20.0 even, and the way he got there was by inefficient shooting because his ego could not allow him to average below 20 points. The reason why he did so poorly is not necessarily because of his age, which was a factor, but mostly because he was simply out of shape. Just like Kobe Bryant in his last season recently could play when he had the wind to do so, but normally was not in good enough shape to maintain that level of play for a full NBA game. The same thing is true of Michael Jordan during the 2002-2003 season. And even more damningly for a guy who supposedly is the greatest player of all time, Michael Jordan was not even the best player on his own fucking team. Jerry Stackhouse, who I've never heard of before this, actually averaged more points and assists than Michael Jordan. I'm sure at least a few of you out there are liberals who don't believe in stats or facts, so I'm going to have to come up with another explanation to get my point across to you. Now, not only was Jordan not the greatest player of all time, but he didn't even have a very high basketball IQ. What's the evidence? Well, that's where we even begin. So, not only did Michael Jordan play on the team, he also continued to manage the team despite the fact that he was no longer an owner. He basically told the coaching staff what to do. He decided what players the team had and didn't have. So, for whatever reason, these dumbass owners actually allowed the Bob Ross of basketball, some guy who sits around talking about basketball but hadn't really played except for 1 year, and they allow him to make all their decisions. So I think this is really on them, but let's give Jordan his due credit for fucking up. So first of all, he drafted Kwame Brown with the number 1 overall pick. If you know anything about Kwame Brown, you know that that was a horrible, horrible mistake, and that deprived the Washington Wizards of a player who might actually, say, be remotely useful. So, that mistake aside, what else did he do? He made some trades. He did trade for Stackhouse. Stackhouse was a great player. But he also did some stupid shit, like he benched Larry Hughes, the same Larry Hughes who eventually went to the NBA Finals with LeBron James in 2007 and was about the second or third best guy on the squad. So, he doesn't have an eye for talent. He doesn't recognize talent in others. Not only is he a fraud on the court, where he pretended to be the best player of all time and wasn't, but he also probably can't really train children very effectively. With the notable exception of Kobe Bryant, who obviously had a very successful career over a 20-year period, Michael Jordan has produced almost no proteges. He's produced no one of note. So I ask you, how in the hell is Michael Jordan the greatest player of all time? The numbers don't add up. Think for yourselves. This has been Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with a truth-flavored bias, signing out.